We're going to run today's lab is we're very quickly going to set up some subtopics or questions and try to determine a thing, and you leave saying, wow, I didn't care about any of that, because your question hopefully will be addressed. So would anyone like to start? And what we'll do is very quickly see if we can do this in 5 minutes or so. Go around, who am I? Do I have a question? What do I want to learn today? And then I'll write it on the board and we'll figure out how to address it. All right, Lisa.
I will start. I'm Lisa. I'm from the safety department and I develop compliance courses. So my questions are, am I missing anything with UDL? Like I get the alt text, I get the captions. But I would like to add audio to some of my courses that have, will have a little bit of text someone has to read. And I want to know, like, how do I insert audio to make it not look odd? What are some of the things we can do with Canvas to incorporate audio? Yeah, because I know that screen readers are awful, and I would rather provide a natural voice.
So
anyone who needs a screen reader.
audio captioning, screen readers, okay.
I purchased a screen reader just to see what it's like.
Yeah.
Oh, it's horrible. It is awful.
All right, we'll hear more about that then. Todd or Tim?
Okay, we can go this
Way
way.
to volunteer, Todd.
All right. So hi, I'm Tim. I work in ESL. My question, I think, is so looking at UDL and thinking about multiple ways of expression. How does that work when it's something that's a mandatory requirement? When we're asked to do something in a certain way, how can we bend those rules a little bit and allow students multiple means of expression?
Yeah, good. I'll keep writing that down. Don?
Don Gilling-Daniel from the Collaborative for Advancing Learning and Teaching, here to learn more about UDL and offer ideas as they relate to the topic.
Thank you. All right.
Lauren Rosen, Collaborative Language Program. I don't know why I'm here. Coffee?
Okay, that's good.
I'm here for the coffee.
Coffee's good. James?
James McKay, Learning Technology Consultant on Learning team. I guess my big thing is are there quick and easy kind of hacks for an instructor who is interested in using more universal design, rather than having to sit and rethink their entire course and put a lot of time and energy into it.
What are the first steps we can do? Great. Morton?
Hi, I'm Morton Angensbacher, and I'm in psychology, professor. And I'm here, I think, to see if we can brainstorm in thinking about universal design beyond just the sensory disabilities, beyond just captioning, or not that captioning is not important, Lisa.
No, I want to learn about all this.
Right, beyond captioning or text, making sure that our PDFs are OCR'd, which is still a super important thing. And for example, we know that, and Phyllis knows as well, and that the number one disability on campus is psychological or psychiatric disabilities, anxiety and depression. And so how can we accommodate and level the playing field for students with anxiety, depression, and then the number two is chronic health conditions, things like lupus and Crohn's disease that interfere with consistent attendance and students are not able to say, oh, I'm not going to have a flare-up on February 30th, there's no February 30th, but on February 23rd, because that's when I have an exam. And they don't have that, So how can we think beyond just physical and sensory disabilities and think about these more common disabilities? And how can we get our classrooms to really level the playing field for all of our students?
It's a broad framing. Great. Jules?
Jules Arnsdorf. I work in the libraries in the teaching and learning department, and I assist with developing online learning objects and support for online classes, the libraries, and I'm here because I'm interested in learning more about UDL, and more than that, thinking about ways to sort of reframe my own approach to designing learning objects, so that accessibility is not an afterthought that's modifying something that's already built, but if there are ways that I can incorporate this from the beginning, it might shift the way I think about how I design things. And also interested in the overlap between user-centered design and UDL.
Great.
My name's Kenny. I'm a grad student in the kinesiology department, and I'm honestly just here to listen and
Okay.
learn.
My name is Phyllis Stride, and I lead a new center for digital accessibility and user experience here on campus. I have a lot of questions on this topic, and I think one of which is, does UDL equal accessibility? I think that's an area of caution and sort of concern for me that may be a perception that if you follow universal design for learning practices, that will equal accessibility. So here on that one, I think an additional question I have is a little bit more around the user experience of being an instructor and user experience of being a student navigating these dimensions here, and how it kind of, what ways might we find to better inform or provide more context so that when you're designing a course or redesigning or thinking about it, how you might evolve it and change it, that you have more information that informs that, so it feels less like, I'm guessing, is this going to make it better for a student or not? And I think that's an area that I'm really interested in. So sort of the user experience of being an instructor.
Great.
I'm Angela, and I teach a biochemistry lab course. But when I think about UDL, I actually I did a little bit of work on the secondary system. So UDL is kind of huge. It's huge with middle school and high school. And so I got to do a little bit of a practicum where I was in a high school. It was actually in Verona, and they do all personalized learning. So a lot of this comes into play. And then my big challenge was one day I had to teach 5 different biology freshman classes, and the thing I always remind myself in UDL is, so for that there were like one class of all the A students, and then there were 2 sections that were struggling. And so with UDL, one thing is you're gonna do something that sort of brings everybody into the fold, and so find ways to use tools that everyone's gonna have access to, the high performers and the low performers, but hopefully will enhance everybody's learning. So just a real short example would be I did like a brief lecture, like 15-minute lecture for all 5 of those sections. And so for all of them, I created a worksheet, which was of the lecture, but with blanks, so they had to kind of fill it out, but everyone got the same material. And the idea was, for the people who are, writing learners versus visuals, like kind of a tool that they could all use. Anyway, so I have examples maybe,
Excellent.
and ideas.
Great. Carolyn.
I'm Carolyn Daughtry-Krill, and I'm an instructional designer here at Academic Technology, and I work with both academic courses and then also more like workforce training courses. So I'm curious how I can be applying UDL more in both of those realms. And the reason I came was to hear just different examples of what has worked and hear ideas, kind of like James said, of simple starts of what are some good, like, hey, you can easily do this to kind of bump up your courses. Looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. AJ.
Hi, I'm AJ Daughtry-Krill, and I work here with Do It. I work with high school students, and I am also just here to hear the examples, hear the challenges from people, meaning challenges for instructors, because I would like to take them on, and I'd love to hear more.
Claudia, right?
My name is Claudia Calderon from the Department of Horticulture, Faculty Associate, and I think my questions are from the instructor perspective. What are the resources that we can have to, we can prepare and we can be mindful about the differences and in learning abilities and being inclusive, but there's always a new challenge that pops up in the class, so we're never going to be prepared to everything that is there. So what are the resources that we have? And that would be like a main question. And I would second the professor from psychology. I do agree that, to have a very holistic perspective of the differences that our students are coming with, and how can we better accommodate them in our classes.
Great. Todd?
Todd Schwanke from the Bernie Disability Resource Center. Morton provided, I think, a great preface. What's on my mind. I certainly have a lot of interest and a lot of questions in this area. I think with the resurgence of kind of interest in this area, getting to, wear multiple hats, but certainly accommodation compliance, and then, but also now looking at as our numbers increase, and Morton kind of summarized that, is how can we partner to figure out strategies that can be practically implemented, and I think kind of relates to a lot of folks who raise those questions.
Yeah, I think that there's people talking to each other.
Taking it to the next level. I think there's been a lot of exploration at this kind of basic level, and it's now digging in a little bit deeper and being more creative and figuring out what's that next level of UDL.
All right, Margaret.
I'm Margaret Murphy. I'm a student at the high school that I work here with John in the active teaching lab.
Claudia?
I forgot one of my questions. Beyond the face-to-face classes, so for classes that are online, or I teach study abroad, and the interaction with students is different. So I'm spending 2 weeks from morning to day with a student that can have different ways from learning, and it's sometimes it's challenging, and having also addressing those points too can be.
We have a resource for you.
Thank you.
Erin?
Hi, yeah, Erin Paul. I teach online classes for independent learning through continuing studies. And my question relates to online learning as well, because we don't always know what our students come in with. And so thinking ahead about what, anticipating their needs, somebody else said that, but anticipating what needs might be and how to make the course, give them more options. Especially since a lot of the classes I teach are required and they don't want to be there. So how do you make that more accessible
And interesting for them.
Yeah, and interesting?
Yeah. And Peter?
I'm Peter Van Cannon, I'm faculty in kinesiology. I think in terms of UDL, one of the important part is to be able, and in general, to engage people in course material, is to have them relate to their own personal and professional experiences. And so one way of doing that is kind of like to start with a reflective exercise. And, my question is how to find the balance between reflective thinking on one side versus critical thinking on the other side.
Very good. All right. And Jennifer?
I'm Jennifer Hornbaker. I'm a grad student in physical therapy and a project assistant who helps with on the active teaching labs, and I'm just interested in seeing what people have tried that's worked for them.
All right. Let's start with the big question at the very top, because I think we've had a lot of people talking. This is the second sort of lab that we're having on accessibility and universal design. The first one we had a couple weeks ago. We've got a link to it in the activity sheet. So you can watch the video of that. This one is more focused, I think, on the universal design. It goes beyond accessibility and accommodation. So, I should also say, if you haven't been here before, at the very top of our activity sheet, you have directions to get to our Canvas course. And at our Canvas course, you'll see a embedded version of this, but there's also another link so that you can click on and have your own live version. In that, you can add at the very bottom of it your notes and resources. So for example, Angela, you said you had some examples. If there are examples that you're willing to, and able to share here, that would be great if you just wanted to add those at some point. And then these stay up for an indefinite amount of time, but perhaps they're almost always accessible. So UDL versus accessibility versus user-centered design for classes. Anyone want to start tackling that one?
I will.
All right.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm one of those purists who doesn't think of universal design in the same way that, for example, is listed on the handout, where it's about multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of expression. I'm one of those purists who think of universal design in instruction or learning as being, excuse me, a parallel to universal design in architecture, so that it's not just about multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, but it's about, for example, in my classes, do I have to make any other accommodation for any other student? Or are all the accommodations and already built in the same way that we think about with universal design and architecture? So I think that these three things are important, but and to me, I'm sure someone who thinks more graphically can talk about where they come from. But to me, I just start with that same principle of a universally designed building is one that everyone can access, that you don't have to do anything else to access that building. And a universally designed course, to me, means that everyone can access it, that a student doesn't need to come to me with a McBurney, or they might come to me with a McBurney visa, but we've already worked it out. Because that's the nature of the course, that flexibility is built in, that I don't have any tests, so there's no need for extended time, or there's no need for a separate room for testing, that all my videos are captioned already and have a transcript. And by the way, I learned about a new captioning app that I'll mention in just a moment, that I used yesterday, that blew my socks off, because it first auto-generates captions for you, but then you can just go in line by line and fix the auto-generations, click, and there's your video. It looks really nice. Anyway, but things like that are all my PDFs, are all my images, including, where do you guys fall off on, or fall down, or go on, GIF or GIF? What's the feeling in the room? I need to read the room.
I call it GIF.
Okay, so it's a majority GIF in this room. Okay, so like even the GIFs are, because I teach a course called Psychological Effects of the Internet, so I have a lot of GIFs. So even the GIFs have,
Alt text?
I'm sorry, right, alt text, or, so anyway, that's to me where I see universal, but I appreciate that some people think about universal design in these other ways, multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of expression. And I think that's important too. It's just that I'm a purist.
Yeah. And in some ways that helps get to the personalization and the ability for students to say, this doesn't work for me, or I'm not passionate about going this way, but thanks for having multiple ones, and that answers Aaron's, or helps to answer Aaron's question of like, if there's a way for me to.
And I'm sorry, I see your hand, but after you, I'd love to hear Phyllis, because Phyllis also made that distinction, and I'd love to hear where you come down in terms of UDL versus accessibility.
Yeah, and Todd as well.
And Todd too, yes.
And all I want to do is kind of reframe and actually take Phyllis's question and flip it backwards. If you make something more accessible, does that automatically make it more universal design?
I guess I would say, I think accessibility is maybe, there's an umbrella of universal design for learning, and accessibility is a component, but I think that there's a big component that's sort of the backwards design of the course, and thinking about what the assessment is and how that ties to the objectives and the activities. It's a big picture. Big umbrella for me is UDL, and then accessibility is one of many components. But then, I like, so like I have quiz, I don't have exams, final exams, because I hate them. They do sort of projects at the end, but we do have sort of 5 quizzes. They're all 15 points, which is, not a huge load, but each quiz is, 45 minutes. And so what I do is I have my TAs take it, and then I multiply that by 3, and then add like another 15 minutes on top of it. So they take 10 minutes, so then the students get 45 minutes. And then, so that I still get students who want time and a half, and that's totally fine. I'll just start a little earlier, but I try to sort of make it not the anxiety stress, because I anticipate that not just people with visas are going to have stress. So little things like that all go under the big umbrella.
And that flexibility of reducing the anxiety and stress really does address some of these invisible issues that we just don't know about. So somebody's question was, how do I know who's got what? And what do I do to prevent that or preempt it? Or and building in that kind of flexibility really helps.
I think, just thinking a little bit, I think something that you said earlier, Morton, really resonated, but which is thinking about this as access is a really, it's a little bit different than multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of expression. Those are kind of qualitative, I think, in some ways, whereas seeing access as, and access not just from an accessibility perspective, but access in other ways as well, as a kind of a, I don't know, the foundation that these things kind of grow and thrive on is a really interesting notion. I think from bringing my user experience designer background to this, I think a little bit about the importance of individual context. And design is fundamentally about, I think to some extent, you're deciding, you're eliminating possibilities. You're taking all the different ways you could do something, or the way you would do something if you were having a one-on-one conversation. You're generalizing a little bit, trying to find a way to, again, enable all those different modes, but there are decisions, things that get in, things that go out. And I think that's the tricky part about if, universal design said you're designing for everyone, it just isn't possible. And I think that's really, there's a, this, I think a great benefit of trying to address as many of these issues or anticipate them or different needs, different ways of engaging upstream. And I think reframing them not as issues is a good thing too. So excuse my development of my language right here in front of everyone.
Yeah.
But I think that that is great, but there are things that are going to come downstream for every single individual. Their contexts are unique that it's like, well, we thought, I think this is where we see sometimes a bit of discomfort as if folks are like, but I did this in a universal way, and they have a student in front of them saying it's not working for them, and it's like, oh, there's like the feelings there I think are hard, because it feels like you did something wrong, or you were trying your very best to do the best thing here, and then it didn't work. And I don't think that way of seeing it, I think it's an uncomfortable feeling, but that's, I guess, just
Yeah.
one of the things.
No, I agree, and I think I loved what you said about the individuality and the fact that to pick back up with what other people said, not every student will have a visa. And just to clarify, because I always feel like this is my role, or not my role, but my whatever to cross to bear is that on this campus, students are not required to have a visa in order for us to accommodate them. That's not required. A lot of my colleagues say they are not going to do anything until they see the visa, but our faculty policies and procedures tell us that it's because of the law, not because of visas, that we do this. But anyway, back to what you were saying, Phyllis, is that I have this, as the third child, I think my first full utterance was, "It's not fair," because my brothers always got to do things that I didn't get to do, and so I've been a lot about equity and equality even before I got involved in academia or disability. And I do think about that a lot in terms of, am I providing information, let's say, am I providing information to any one student that I'm not providing to all students? I have colleagues who say, oh, well, if the students come to my office hours, I'll tell them the stuff that they need. But I always say, well, are office hours required? Do all students know that that's the way that they're going to get the inside line and things like that? So even things like, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about this term that I just was emailing with my colleague about is vocabulary, the vocabulary that I use, not the technical, but just the everyday. And that, I'm certain have students in my classes for whom some of that vocabulary is novel. And so I've started, since I teach completely by choice online, I've started linking any word that I think, might be anything other than a super high frequency word. Like the most recent one was niche, because I have an assignment about niche dating sites. And I started thinking, there's no guarantee everyone knows the word niche. And that's something, again, that came to me truly because a student came to me saying, what does itemize mean? And so I said, you know what, I'll share with you what I think itemize means, but I'm going to put that up for everyone so that everyone has access. And to me, that's more of that. Again, designing at that individual level. Is that capturing what you were thinking about?
So I see that in some ways as being almost fantastic for words that need to be understood within your discipline and sort of the way that your discipline understands it. But you've got a digital thing, they can copy and paste it, look up niche as a general understanding. They've got the
One would
rules,
hope.
right? So is that, from the inspector's perspective, how much extra work is it for me to go through and link to definitions for all of the non-special language words?
I just was using that as an example of something I started thinking about in this MO. Am I providing any teaching, we'll just say, to any one student that I'm not providing to all 130 other students whom I'm teaching? Because I know one of my favorite, and she might even actually be on here because she usually does dial in. One of my favorite TAs, when she first came to me, she said there was a student who she had been a TA for in another class, and that student even said, I would not have passed this class if I wouldn't have been able to work one-on-one with this TA. And I thought that's wonderful and lovely, and I adore the fact that that's true. But what about the other 99 students in the class who might not have known? I mean, think about, I wasn't first gen to attempt college. I'm first gen to successfully finish college. And then my brothers were like, oh, she could do it, we can do it, right? But I think about, I never went to an office hour, ever. I had no clue that that's what you were supposed to do.
Well, they're intimidating.
And I think that there are different cultural perspectives about office hours, all of which is to say, if any information that I'm providing one student, I want to provide to all students. And so if they ask me, what does itemized mean, then I don't.
So to that, I know that there are some instructors who, and they didn't talk about this through a UDL thing, but they'll say, if students ask them a question, they will send an email out to everybody, or they'll put it in their inbox, or they'll put an announcement on the Canvas page for that so that everybody gets that benefit. And that's an easy way to do it. You're going to respond anyway. You might as well hit that response as an announcement. So.
I guess kind of related to anticipating needs, I think asking students can be really informative. Especially, even maybe you're not going to be able to fix it that time around, but something goes terribly or you didn't, a quiz went awful, you can definitely stop, regroup, and sort of get some feedback and say, well, what would have helped? What could I have done better? And I think that, just in my own experience each semester, there's usually at least one thing where I'm like, well, yeah, what do you guys think? This was terrible, right? And then they tell me, they're honest. And
Very humble teacher.
I think that can help too. And that way you're not, because you can't think of everything,
Yeah.
So, especially when you're in the context of a specific lesson and you want to provide that information to all students. And so as much as you can build it into the front end, I think asking them what would help.
It's a both and, right?
Yeah,
we both anticipate based on prior
There's like general
experience.
things, but then there might be something where, especially, it's a lab course I teach, so I'll write something in the lab, makes perfect sense to me. And then I realize half the class doesn't understand because of the way I worded it or because the language was just not quite simple enough because it's a lot of visual things, or I needed to just go add a picture. So I would go add a picture of whatever the thing is in the next version of the lab manual. So sometimes there's stuff that you don't realize because in your brain it makes total sense.
And in some ways, like if you do ask them, if you get good feedback on that, that helps your teaching. It makes it easier for you. So reward them, make it anonymous, reward them. Use an anonymous survey in Canvas. This is a way, we can do this now. We couldn't do it in D2L, but we can do it now. We can give them credit for answering a question on, give me your thoughts on the last assignment. Not related to we don't know their name. We just know that Canvas knows that that person answered, but we don't know which feedback was there. So that's another way to get some of that information. Because they might be afraid, especially out of, scary thing called office hours, where they walk into your domain and you're behind the desk and they're like, this isn't comfortable for me. You can hold office hours in the classroom. That would make it more their domain. Okay, any other questions about UDL and accessibility? We didn't get into the user-centered, but I think that that's another, part of that umbrella thing. I'm going to skip on the audio and captioning and screen readers for now because we've got a lot of other things. That one gets into a lot of technical stuff unless somebody has some quick broad ideas
Just
on.
one quick
Yes.
principle, which is, because I'm a cognitive psychologist and I study language comprehension. And multiple means, this comes, almost sounds like UDL, and I'm not.
Almost.
Almost, but multiple means of representation always trumps a single mean. So if you have, as long as they're consistent, as long as the text mirrors the speech, having both is not harmful. And just like captions, we know that captions help everyone. Captions don't just help individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. Captions help fluent hearing speakers because it's multiple means of information. So I would say go for it, Lisa, and put your audio in there because, you know, apart from just breaking the monotony, it will help.
It would be, well, I know it, like in the storyline, you could have the audio start automatically, but
yeah,
I wonder how you make it look.
Oh,
pretty
sound and
instead of just inserting this big giant like, thing that says audio.
Yeah,
And then you
yeah.
have to click on
I
it.
didn't think that one through, but usually having multiple sources. I mean, I don't know how many of you have been in contexts where there's been cart captioning, and you'll see that half the audience is like reading the cart caption, even because multiple sources of information is just always trumps single.
And I want to highlight something that Todd brought up at one of our last discussions, which is the automatic captioning stuff generally is not sufficient because it does not include the parenthetical things that can't be translated. So that's where you need to stop and take that and say, and here are the other parts that the automatic captioning missed out on. And
the automated is generally just transcription. It's not captions. So think of more of it as subtitles or.
Yeah, and I'm gonna capture that transcription versus captioning. So go with the captioning, Lauren.
So at the risk of being difficult,
Go for
it. There's the suggestion or the death by PowerPoint or whatever you want to call it, where you're supposed to have less on your slides, like just an image, and what you say is what matters. So that seems a direct conflict to.
Totally.
So
Totally
which way
agree.
should it be?
No,
And it's part of the design too, right?
No, totally agree. And I I even just finished a chapter saying exactly that. But I think that's a different context in which someone's going to like an in-person lecture versus a video that is preserved for people to look at on their own time.
So this gets into an online course versus
or even just
face-to-face
capturing,
then, and which is the best way to do that?
Well, I think a lot of the data suggests, even though there's, the UK is fighting this battle before we are about lecture capture, and they've had all sorts of conflicts, but then also they have lots of data being collected, and that on balance, lecture capture, lecture capture trumps just lecture alone. That if students can then go back to, in the old days, your dorm room, but, to your home and review. In the same way, the whole controversy about note-taking and the notion is notes should be about as verbatim as you can get them, because you're then going to go back to that verbatim copy of what it is and synthesize it. If you try to synthesize in the moment, the lecture could be way ahead of you. So anyway, but back to the PowerPoint. I'm with you on PowerPoint should not be this. But the other problem with the way people do the PowerPoints is they usually have a ton of text up there, and they're not in parallel with that text. So it's even worse. Not only is there death by PowerPoint, but it's incongruent.
I've also read some articles about professional speakers who, when asked for their slides, they do not send their actual slides. They have a separate slide deck with a transcript, and where sometimes we'll have a build of the slide, leads to that slide, leads to that slide. They'll put them together so that it's after the fact. It's a different set of notes that's
And the speaker notes come up with that too.
idealized.
Yeah, I had to do that when the class canceled that week because we missed
Right.
the lecture. And so I took my slides and basically just went back and added notes to all of them because we weren't going to be in class that day.
in some ways, this is why, like, the universal design, the designing from the beginning makes so much sense, because if you design the building with the elevator in it from the beginning, you don't have to go back in and retrofit the elevator, which is way more expensive and a pain in the butt to do if you didn't do it ahead of time.
Those snow days are a good example of,
You can't put PowerPoints on Canvas, you have to put PDFs on Canvas. It's a space, and then you need Google Drive.
Well, right, because the Google Slides work very well in Canvas. You can embed those right there, and they can open it up to their own thing and see the captions.
But doesn't Microsoft 360 or whatever
Oh,
it is,
Laura,
doesn't
please
that
don't.
integrate right into it? It's supposed to. I haven't played with it.
It's supposed to.
Oh, is it messy?
Like all PowerPoint files.
Yeah, well, that would be the Office,
Yeah,
whatever. I
From
haven't
what
tried.
I've heard, it is not quite there
It's
yet.
not there, okay.
People get
Maybe I
express
should play with it so
frustration.
I know
You
what.
should. Then
yeah, no,
perhaps
design
not.
simple, bottom line is do design simple slides, but then have the verbatim text to accompany, but do design, I mean, I would hate to
Okay.
walk out of this room with people saying, no, because that's like what I've been arguing for like 15 years on slide design.
Resources versus support. What do we have on campus as far as this goes? Well, we all know about McBurney for accommodation and accessibility on certain levels. That's more of my understanding is that's more of a student-centered or for students and not so much for instructors. To a design course, I don't think they do any of that.
I think that, yeah, no, I think that there, I mean, well, you correct me, I mean, it's your job, not mine, I'll just tell you what I see, is I just think of McBurney as a resource center, and then it's where you can, I mean, that's in their name, right? It's a resource center, and it's where anyone can get resources in terms of ideas and guidance and suggestions and the like. Will they provide an ASL interpreter for your colleague who's no, but they can give you resources of names to call and places. So I think of them as just a great resource, and they have great ideas about how to work with students in all different kinds of classes.
Increasingly, I think due at academic technology and some of the other programs are starting to do this better. I think for a long time we were doing only face-to-face, and it was almost that's not our area really, so we avoided it. But I think that in the blended UW program, they are now talking about this a little bit more. There's always opportunities to improve, of course, and I say that with a not really accessible slide behind me. But
That is really terrible.
well, it's not a slide, okay? This is a live course. I'm just showing it to you. I
how do
can
you
put a
really-
slide on right now.
Those tiny fonts really get.
It's for your machine. Stop it.
Can I ask for the instructors in the room, what kind of resources would be helpful?
Yeah.
What are you looking for?
Yeah, well, I just mentioned that one that app, I'll look it up, that for captioning, where it goes through and does auto-generate, which, is not great, as we all know, but it's about 70% of it. And then you can go in and clean and add your other things like music and not music, but you know what I mean, the diacriticals of what's going on. And I had never heard of that. I didn't know that we had a facility like that. And when I ask my colleagues, they think about, well, they either get money from IE or they go to McBurney. And, this I actually liked doing myself. I mean, it took like 15, 20 minutes to do a 15-minute video.
What's it called?
I'm gonna look it up.
We had on our last the lab on accessibility, we had several resources listed for the captioning the campus uses, the preferred ones and other options that are available. Those are linked on this sheet, which again, the digital version, live links.
I mean, that's just about captions, but
Right.
there'd be other things. Okay, it is called K as in King, A as in Apple, P as in Peter, wing, like a bird's wing.com, capwing.com / don't take this literally, subtitles. But it does the auto generating, and then you go in and clean it up line by line. So
So is that better than what YouTube does right now?
Well, YouTube does the auto generating, but there's no way to clean up. I mean, you can download their transcript. This is, I wish I could describe it. Like you upload the video and then it shows you, here's the video and it shows you line by line and you can just edit.
So it's just easier to do that.
You can just edit it right there, you know. And YouTube gives you the transcript, but it's off of auto generation and then you have to improve it.
Right. Okay.
And upload it again. Whereas here, it's like right there on your screen.
Right there,
Just right on your screen. And you can even move things temporally. And you can add in the things like music, or what are they called, Sean? When I'm calling the diacriticals, I'm sorry.
The intros and outros?
Well, no, when you're describing like door slams.
Sort of the editorial things in
door
brackets.
slams or
Little
bird
musical
singing
notes.
or, is there a
It's
term
all
for it?
well, it's a combination of non-spoken and off-screen.
Yeah, so, yeah. Or who's speaking, like it doesn't tell you if you've got two people, who's speaking. And that's really,
Capwing apparently has all kinds of video-related tools.
Yeah.
I've
It's
not heard
just
about
that,
it.
but
A
that's-
former student of mine who's a professor at Slack. I started learning that word. Learned about it on a listserv and said, wow.
So this is not a UW supported tool.
Yeah, I know.
Official disclaimer.
But could we get something like that?
There's always the parenthetical yet that we
Yeah.
might add. It's just that I am not in an advocacy position right now. Kari.
Don't we have an ongoing pilot right now with Kaltura to do some automatic captioning?
I believe that we do. Yes, I do not know whether it is captioning or transcription. I don't know the details on it. We are having a lab on that. So if you want to
And
come
can
back.
you do the editing? On the, okay,
It's a little clunkier, it sounds like maybe Capwing.
a little clumsier.
Clunkier, I mean, I just think.
I mean, I think that's the part that sucked me in is like, I uploaded, boom, and I just went line by line and I was out of there in 15 minutes.
Well, and I think
And I'm a Southerner. I mean, like it had to auto caption me. So there's a lot of problems there.
Let's talk about clunkiness and hit that instructor versus student perspectives, right? Nobody likes clunkiness, right? And yet we find that what is clunky to us is different. What is clunky to me is different maybe than what is clunky to other people. So what are the elegant parts of this? What are the simple, and I think oftentimes it comes down to what are the core simpler things that we can do, because we often hear that elegance is in simplicity. So I guess to your question, what are the simple starts that we can do that are elegant, that are not having us trip over each other or going through extra hoops and hurdles?
Well, I think I can even take this to tie it to Phyllis's question, because from an instructor perspective, or as an instructional designer, one resource that would be super helpful is a way to test the accessibility of my content, right? And right now you can do screen readers and you can do this, that, but something that kind of said, oh, you're using HTML, here's something that can test that accessibility. You're using a video hosting service.
I believe 3 school used to have those.
There's a link on the bottom here to a couple of tools for testing.
But just to have it in it, because I'm just thinking from the perspective, what I'm going to do as a professor, I'm going to be like, okay, I need this right now. Where is it? And if I Google it, I'm going to get 15 million.
So are you all familiar that in Canvas, in every field that has text, that you can add rich text, there is an option with this little guy in a circle that's an accessibility tester, and it works pretty good. And I'll say actually that as a resource, Canvas is a pretty good resource. It provides a pretty accessible framework that when you put stuff in there, it works pretty well to handle a lot, not all, but a lot of the accessibility issues that you'll have. So that's another one that you can use. Other elegant first steps, we heard keep it simple. Angela?
To also make our connection back to learning and not just the accessibility, but the sort of board design. Making sure things like, are your instructions sort of clear to everybody? Are your expectations and sort of, assessment guidelines? So like having rubrics and
you know, because what you expect should never be a question for the students, so finding ways to make sure that they're understanding what it is they are supposed to be doing. And I also, I think along with that, maybe if possible, making time in class for things like, you know, deep question sessions, or even working on assignments in a place where they can ask a question right away, because that helps with issues of anxiety with office hours. If everyone's there working on something and you're just circling around, that's a great way to kind of help with everyone gets a chance to ask a question. So I think making sure that your communication is clear really helps too.
Can I build off on that and ask a question to the room? What do we think, I'm gonna do it anyway. What do we think about employing their peers to help answer some of these questions and help make things, what I'm getting at is, if I'm an instructor and I've got 100 students, it's going to be hard for me to find that time and to be able to make sure that everybody gets it. If the students are in a class of, or a smaller group of 3 to 5 or whatever, they can ask questions. What each member of that group needs and their specific wants and needs for how things get explained can oftentimes be sort of figured out in that more intimate setting, more intimate group, than if I try to do it as an instructor. Just, I can't even be aware. But
Or a group can come up with a question.
or a group can come up with a question that touches on things that one person might not be able to come up with on their own on the fly. Thoughts on that? There's a danger, right?
I have mixed feelings.
Yeah.
I mean, one is that, you know, as a parent of offspring with disabilities, I remember, you know, someone from Madtown Twisters, for any of you who have parents, called me and said, oh, we have this new program and it's going to be great. And each child with a disability is going to bring a typically developing peer, and the typically developing peer is going to show them how to do all these cool things. And I said, why would my son want to do that? You know, I mean, there's like, I'm not friends with anyone who knows how to do all these things. I mean, you know, and shows me how poor I am at everything. I mean, why in the world would I want that to happen? So I mean, that's an extreme case, but I think, you know, one does run that risk of accentuating even more some of the differences. And I think there's also that piece back to kind of the office hours, which is there's still going to be people in that group of 5, 10, 12, or 20 who are not going to feel comfortable. It's just not part of their culture to ask somebody else. They might even think they're asking them to do the work for them. I mean, I really do think, even though it's hard, that we want our instructions, like you were saying, we want our instructions to be understandable by all students, not just those who have a leg up for some reason. I just, you know, back to the it's not fair kind of thing. And that is, I don't know of any simple elegance. I mean, that's just trial and error. That's just, you know, when you have more than 5 people in a class of 130 asking the same question or making the same error, you know, you haven't been crystal clear.
Yeah.
And you got to change it. And, you know, I mean, ironically, some of my colleagues on exams, they think, well, that's great. I don't want every student to get every question correct. I want to see some separation and some distinction. I'm just the opposite. My goal would be for every student to do perfectly on every assignment. And if they don't, then, I think it's as much about me as them.
This is, I don't know, maybe completely crazy as I'm not in the instructional space, but it strikes me that the question, like, and I don't know that this is the way you would ask it as instructors, but how could this topic or assignment how could it have been clear for you? Is it kind of a difficult question to answer, because you may have to kind of reveal something about yourself, and you also are telling someone how to do something differently, when even if someone thinks that they're receptive to that, they might be like, oh, come on, like you're just, you know, you're just coming up. So I don't know, maybe there's some way to frame that differently, that it's more about like, what was it like to do this assignment? Or what steps did you take to do this assignment? It's a little bit of a different way of reflecting on it. And that I can imagine doing in a shared context with some other students to come up with recommendations for how an assignment could have been better. Because then you're talking about, this is what I did, and oh, this is what you did, and like, oh, that is way harder, and I can see why it's harder. That's not cool. It should be easier to do that. That might, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a naive way of thinking about it, but getting a little bit, like having a little bit more structure on thinking through how to make something better would give other students more context for the different ways that people are doing things as well.
And the trust issue.
An example, my lab class, first time I taught this version of the curriculum, we had a lab that went awful, like nobody finished, people were crying. They were, in my memory, they were crying, but like they were on the verge of tears. So I was like, send everyone away and say, it's fine, we'll deal with it. And so, you know, I regrouped with my colleagues and we decided to just redo it the next week. But part of what I did after because we redid a lab, like a lecture, we redid problem sets, and then we redid the lab, it was beautiful. So then I had a survey that was like, what did you do different? Like, so it was like, you can't always do that because you're not always gonna get to repeat something. But it was a very more specifically, and I gave some examples, like, did you, you know, was it solution factors? Like, was it this, what was the topic? And, you know, what did I do differently between the 2 weeks that you think was really helpful? So it's not just what they did, but what I did. And then I also sometimes, if someone does really terribly on an assignment, because I do have due dates because we have to kind of keep moving, which, you know, there's flexibility, but if someone's, you know, below basically like a low B or a C, I usually reach out to them and say, hey, come chat with me and I'll give you a chance to like earn back a point or two, but like, let's talk about what it is that went wrong and where you can kind of, and I try to do that early in the semester. So there, you know, again, with 150 people, that might not be so useful, but you can probably have an assignment, or especially early, you know, your lower stakes assignments that are maybe redoable so that they can see how they did it and then do it again.
So in that, one second. In that asking students, there's a thing about that, right? We don't have a lot of experience with other instructors and what they're doing. Your students have a lot of other examples that they can say, you know what, I've been in 8 classes and this one professor unnamed does a really good example of that. So maybe how do I do this better? Sometimes we're asking them to answer questions that they don't know how to answer, to Phyllis's point, but have you brought in an example, or, you know, have you seen an example of this being done well or something like this that I could use? Use them as your little feelers around campus. And if you get into a group of 5 students, that's 5 times 12 classes or 30 classes or whatever. So you are getting a pretty big thing.
So, even though this isn't elegant, I was just wondering if we could talk real quickly before our time is out about some low-hanging fruit, or at least what I think is low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And one of them, as Todd knows, one of the accommodations that students can request is to have the syllabus in advance of the first day of class. It helps them plan, it helps them obtain their materials. I've just been on this mantra for a long time, which is we should all make our syllabi available during registration. Students should be the most informed as possible when they register for a class, and we can do that. We can put it up with the little green man on, and I think it should be mandated across the university. We know there are data from other universities that the more information that students have, including access to syllabi, the fewer adds and drops, and the shorter time to degree. It's just, to me, is low-hanging fruit. And if we don't have a mandate from the university, we should all take it upon ourselves to make our syllabi available during registration. And if not during registration, which is number one, dang it, at least a month before the class opens, because why should only students who've gone to the trouble to get a visa through McBurney have access to the syllabus? It makes 0 sense to me at all. Number 2 is students, another accommodation, as we know, is a note taker. And why should, again, only students who have the resources and who've gone to the trouble to get a visa from McBurney have access to notes? And we can discuss about what those notes should look like, but I think that that's another place where there's some low-hanging fruit and there's potential for inequities with and feelings of unfairness, because some students have access to that and some don't.
Great.
I have that third one, but I know I'm kind of short and his hand's been up.
I was just going to mention, in terms of syllabi, Linda Nilsson's written about graphic syllabi, and so talking about the multiple means of representation. And then a slight flip on what you were saying, Phyllis. When I was listening to you, I was thinking about the metacognitive piece, but asking students how they solved the problem, not how they did your assignment.
Right.
And so the flip is about the learning that's taking place. So you, with your expert learning style, can look at the steps that may be missing in the learning process around whatever it is, rather than focus on the assignment.
Sure. And to do that's a little thing you can do in like a lecture or discussion situation, is don't ask what the students as to like how to start, or, you know, like, so that way it's not everyone checking to make sure they got the right answer, but
Right.
did they take the
What steps
steps?
did you take to get to that?
So I just quickly looked up a graphic syllabi and I immediately thought of the one that you did
Yeah.
for your
Pages.
second.
Yeah, I do.
class.
I love the fuzzy on that. The third thing I was gonna say is that as a student, I really dislike courses that only reveal information to me, not just about the syllabus, but, information to me as we got to it. I really like to have the information at the beginning, even though I knew I wasn't going to, and that's what I try to do with my classes. So, people who don't bring you might not be able, I time my discussion boards to only open 2 weeks before they're due, but all the content that student needs is available from the first day. Actually, it's available during registration. I mean, in my timetable note, I say, go look at my course. I have it on a WordPress site. Go look at my course. Look through everything. If it's not going to be a good fit for you, don't take it, because it's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for me. I think the more information we can provide to students, the absolute better.
That gives them the flexibility if they wake up terrible one day, they
Yeah.
may have been able to work ahead.
Yeah.
We're out of time. Are there any other questions that we haven't hit? And if they are, let me know, because I'm here for another half hour and I'm sure that other people will be willing to stick around and ask. Thank you again for coming. Please, on your way out, if you can just hit a couple of check boxes on these, that'd be awesome.